Hello everyone, I'm Johan Smit, a young adventure trail kind of enduro rider from South Africa. I'm out here the third time trying to shoot this video. So let's get into the video. This video is going to be about misconceptions about sprocket changes and why I feel many people change their sprockets out for the wrong reasons. Now this video is focused on the technical side of sprockets and ratios and drivetrain technologies and just technical stuff, and not like common or good practices when it comes to drivetrain and taking care of it. And then also this video is focused on dirt bikes or bikes that go off-road, dual sport bikes, adventure bikes, and then also obviously bikes with chains and not with belt drives or drive shafts. Okay, so sprocket changes. The reasons I've heard people say they change out their sprockets on their bikes is first of all, they think it makes the bike more powerful. Secondly, many they feel you get more acceleration, better fuel economy, and then easier to wheelie. Now obviously some of those have some truth to them, but I'll get to that and I'll address that later in the video once I've explained how the whole thing works. And then also at the end I'll show you how to work out your sprocket sizes if you wanted to change them on your bike, how to calculate the sizes of the sprockets you would need for the desired result. So how does the drivetrain work? So first of all, we have the engine, and then the engine feeds the rotation to the gearbox. Now your gearbox has 5 or 6 gears. In this video I'm going to refer to the 6th gear as the highest gear because my bike has 6 gears. So the rotation comes from the engine and goes into the gearbox, and then from the gearbox you can choose between all 6 gears, and then that feeds to the output of the gearbox. Now every gear has a different ratio. So the first gear has a specific ratio, the second gear has a specific ratio, the third gear has a specific ratio. Every gear has its own ratio. As you gear up, it makes the output of the gearbox faster and faster and faster. So, and then from the output of the gearbox, we have a final, the final drive, which in this case is a chain, and this adds another ratio. So we have the gearbox that has 6 different ratios. And then from that we have a final ratio that determines the speed of the back wheel. But then also we, if we want to calculate the, the power or the torque that you're going to feel at, certain speeds and stuff, we have to just, consider the whole system with one ratio. So that's the ratio between the engine RPM and the final, back wheel spinning, or your speed on the ground, which is, those two go together. So, as I said, we have 6 different ratios and a single final one that multiplies, that 6 ratios with a number, and that is determined by the sprocket sizes. So, to convey the point I have to make, I'll have to set up a scenario. Now I'm going to create 2 scenarios, and that'll help me explain my point. So let's create scenario number 1. This is a little bit unrealistic with dirt bikes, but some super bikes has this, and that is, let's say if my engine spins at 4,000 RPMs and I'm in first gear and I go 60 kilometers per hour. That's my speed. I do it at 4,000 RPM and I'm in first gear. So that's scenario number 1. Now let's say we go and change my sprockets and make the bike way slower, so that now I'm doing 60 kilometers per hour in 6th gear at 4,000 RPM. Okay, so you see it's totally different sprockets. My bike is totally slower in the second scenario. I'm in 6th gear and I only go 60 kilometers per hour at 4,000 RPM. So, okay, those are my two scenarios. Now you might have realized that, you know, the ratio stays exactly the same because the input RPM and the output speed is exactly the same. And that's right. So if you know, that basically means that your bike will feel exactly the same whether you have, you know, the first scenario or the second scenario going 60 kilometers per hour. Same ratio, same power. So that just proves that Sprocket Changes doesn't change the power of your bike. It doesn't change the power. Your bike won't feel stronger with, you know, shorter gearing or longer gearing. And when I refer to shorter gearing or longer gearing means just your bike is geared so that, you know, you go slower in each gear, and higher gearing means, you know, at the same RPM you're going a little bit faster in every gear. So high gearing, faster gearing, low gearing, slower. Okay, so let's discuss the points that I mentioned previously that many people change their sprockets for. So let's go with the first one. It gives your bike more power or more acceleration. Now, okay, let's just discuss the more power. As I just mentioned, sprocket sizes didn't matter at all in that situation. It didn't matter at all. So that means that the sprocket changes or sprocket sizes, different ratios, it doesn't give you more power. Okay, second one, it gives you better acceleration, and that has some truth to it. So the theory is if you have shorter gearing, you shorten your gearing to make your bike accelerate faster. Now, an engine has a power curve, and that's, you know, at 2000 RPM, we don't make a lot of power. Say your engine makes max power at 6000 RPM, and then it drops off from there. I'll put a graph on the screen and then you can see. So the thing is, if you have shorter gearing, you'll fit in more gears in a certain speed. So let's say we're accelerating from 0 to 100 kilometers per hour. That's our, you know, acceleration test. From 0 to 100 kilometers per hour. Now, if we have shorter gearing, that means we might use all 6 other gears. So our max speed is about 110 maybe. So we're going to use all 6 gears to get to 100. Let's say we have long gearing. So very fast gearing. That'll, you know, implement that we maybe only use 3 gears. So our top speed might be 150 kilometers per hour. That's 6th gear. Maybe 140 or 130 with 5th gear. So we will only use 4 gears to get to 100 kilometers per hour. Now that means you have less different ratios to work with. Okay, so here we have the two power curves. I just wanted to show you this visually. If we have more gears, so let's take the blue curve, the YZ125's power curve. So if we had a shorter gearing setup, this is the part of, you know, the power curve that we would use. So yeah, you know, most of this part of the engine's power curve that we use is above 30 horsepower. Now let's say we have a wider ratio gearbox or longer gearing. Then if we shift, our RPMs would drop more, and, you know, to counter the RPM drop, you would also shift a bit later, you know, to get you closer in the next gear, to get you closer to the power curve. So you would maybe use the red lines as shift, you know, areas. But then you can see we're using part of the time we are using, only about 25 to 30 horsepower, and on the top end also, between 25 and 30, which is not the max output. So there you can see that if we have shorter gearing, we can keep the bike closer to the maximum power curve. Now this is with the 2-stroke. So let's reset this and look at the yellow curve for a 4-stroke. So let's say we have shorter gearing, so we only use this part once again. Now there you can see we have about 32 horsepower output. Now let's say we have a wider gear ratio setup or a longer gear setup. There we go, we shift there and we shift there. That's very wide, but there you can see we're always about at 30 horsepower. I mean, there we have about 2 horsepower more, maybe a half here less, maybe, yeah, see, we're up right about 30 there also. So with a 4-stroke, really we don't need, just a middle part, the top part of the power curve, because it's so broad. Now, I mean, if we had a very, very, wide power curve, or wide long gearing, then I mean you can shift here, and okay, well the engine won't go higher than that, so there we go. Now, this is the part where you actually notice a decrease in power. But I mean, this is a very long ratio, a long gearing setup. So with 4 strokes, this really doesn't matter that much. It won't give you much more acceleration. Now that is true with 2 strokes. Shorter gearing would give you better acceleration. And then it makes your bike really easier. Now, the scenarios I've heard these people, implementing a sprocket change is they have an enduro bike that they do a supermoto, swap on. So smaller wheels, make it more road focused. Now, with supermotos, your wheelies is going to be high speeds, relatively high speeds, cruising speeds, 30 kilometers per hour up to 100 kilometers per hour. You're going to do fast wheelies. And then, as I said previously, in that speed range, sprocket changes don't do anything. Sprocket changes only affect the bottom, your first gear, your minimum speed, and your maximum speed, your top speed. But you're only shifting the actual speed range. So let me show you a video of what I mean. So let me represent that in a visual way. So let's give our bike an RPM range of, let's say, 1k, 1000 RPM and 10,000 RPM. And then let's say that results in our speed that is, let's make it 5 kilometers per hour and 100 kilometers per hour. That gives us, at this RPM range, first gear gives our 5 kilometers per hour, and our max speed at 10,000 RPM at 6th gear gives us 100 kilometers per hour. Now let's do a sprocket change. So let's gear this bike faster, give it longer gearing, or faster gearing, higher gearing. So this will result in a bit of increase in the bottom end and an increase at the top end. So this might take us to 120 and this might take us to 7. So yeah, and obviously it's going to be a small difference here and large difference at higher speeds because it's ratios and it's not just a plus or minus. So here you can see this range right here is exactly the same as this range over here. There we go. It's the exact same. Only thing that changed is this part here that we lost and this part here that we gained, but the blue area stays exactly the same. So it means nothing will change. You still give it 7 to 100 kilometers per hour, but now you increase the top end and took away from the bottom end, but nothing in the middle changed. Okay, so there you can see your top speed and your minimum speed only shifts if you're doing sprocket changes. So what these people do is they give the bike shorter gearing to make it really easier at 60 kilometers per hour. But that won't matter because your bike doesn't have more power there. Now, in one case that might actually make sense, and that's if you're converting a motocross bike with a very fast first gear into a supermoto and you want to do slow wheelies. Then you might want to give the bike a little bit shorter gearing. But even in that case, a motocross bike's first gear isn't too fast for wheelies. But I mean, if you wanted to, then it's acceptable. But with converting an enduro bike to a supermoto, you're already changing a very, very first slow gear with an enduro bike and making it even slower. It just, doesn't really make sense. So it's definitely quite an untrue fact that giving your bike shorter ratio or shorter gearing will make wheelies easier. That's definitely not real. Especially with higher cc bikes with a lot of power, you don't need to be, a wheelie might take a lot of power to get up on, but that you can decide to get the perfect RPM to lift up. But once you're up and you're doing a good wheelie that's quite, on balance point, you don't need a lot of power. And then ratios doesn't matter to give you the highest power. So even if your gears are far apart, you should be able to keep it up. Yes, shorter gearing would help if you're a little bit off balance point, and it can bring you up and get you to the best RPM always. But any bike is designed to give you, the gears. We have 5 gears to work with. So you should always have a gear that's going to work for you. So it's really not applicable to do a sprocket change for easier wheelies. And then better fuel consumption. That's also not true, because we as off-road riders, we don't always, or we hardly ever ride top gear fast. We do technical terrain, and in that range you decide the RPM you're running at. So the theory behind that is gearing your bike longer to make you run on a lower RPM, giving you less, making you use less fuel. But with anything other than the 5th or the 6th gear, we decide the RPM we want to ride at, so it won't affect your fuel usage that much. For a road bike it might make sense if you are cruising and you might want to drop, give that a little bit longer gearing, drop your RPM a bit, make your fuel consumption a bit better. But then once again, I would rather gear my bike to give me top speed at the top horsepower RPM of my bike, and not gear it too long to make me struggle to get up to speed because my RPMs are too low in the top gear. So yeah, I'll get to how you should gear your bike in just a minute. So reasons you might want to change, real reasons in my opinion, that you might want to change the sprockets on your dirt bike, or on your Duel Sport or whatever. You want to change the top speed. So that's a really acceptable reason you might want to change the sprockets. If your bike comes with too long of a gearing, that many manufacturers do that to as I said, it might with top end cruising, reduce your fuel consumption a bit. Many manufacturers gear their bikes quite high so that they pass the emission tests and stuff. Okay, so you might want to change your sprockets to give you the best top speed that your bike can offer. Now, there are two ways that you can, approach this, the sprocket change decision. Now, the first one is if you went onto the internet, say you have a motocross bike, and you went onto the internet and you saw a top speed run of your same bike, no mods to it, and it's doing a lot higher speed than your bike can do. Now, you should also notice that your bike runs out of RPM on the top gear, and you feel like you need another gear and another gear, but you don't have those gears because you ran out of gears. Now, that's obviously the symptom of too short of a gearing. So then you could extend your gearing, make it longer. So you could use the top speed that you saw on the internet and approach the sprocket change calculations from that, or you can do it with just experimenting and just rough calculations. Another reason why you might want to do sprocket changes is if you have massive gaps between gears. So with this bike, I have a very slow first gear, but then second gear is in many cases a little bit too long for me, too fast for me. I'll do an hill climb and then I'm in first, but then I feel, okay, I have a lot of power now, I have to switch, I can go a bit faster. Then I switch, and then second is just too fast. I don't have, the RPM to get there, and I'm falling out of the power band and then having to switch back to first gear. So if you have massive gear gaps like that with trail bikes or cross-country enduro bikes, you might find that the first and second gear is very slow, and then there's a bigger gap to third gear. So in that case, you might want to bring that ratio down a bit to decrease the gaps between the gears. But then once again, this is going to affect your first gear speed and your top speed. So the trick is to find a balance between all of those things. I'm just dealing with that bigger gap between first and second because I want speed, I want top speed as well, for highway riding and stuff like that, or just gravel road riding. And my first gear is fine, it's the speed I want, it's perfectly fine. So I'm just dealing with the gap. But if you have an enduro race coming up and you're never going to do 100, 120, 130 kilometers per hour, you can give it shorter ratio, make the max speed now, sacrifice max speed that you're not going to use, and give you more ratios to work with within the speed range that you're going to be working at. So those are the three reasons: top speed, first gear speed, and gaps between gears that you might want to change your sprockets for. So, okay, sprocket changes. Now, you have a ratio between the back sprocket, which is the big sprocket, and then the sprocket that sits on the output of your gearbox. Now you divide, the back sprocket, the amount of teeth that it has, it's printed somewhere on the sprocket. It would be anything from 40 to maybe 50, 55, maybe 60, but that's quite big then. So it'll be in that range, and then the front one could be anything from 12 to 20. Mine is 15, 16, I'm not sure now, and I have 40 at the back, I think, I'm not sure. So this bike, when I got it, it had very short gearing. I was doing 80 kilometers per hour, and then I was running at quite a high revs, and I was feeling I have a lot more power left, but I'm running out of gears. I'm revving too high, and I don't want to rev any higher. So then you change the sprockets. Now I approached it in this way. Okay, so how there's two ways of approaching a sprocket change, just as I said. The one is with percentage change, and the other one is using a specific speed that you have, your goal for a specific speed, obviously reachable with the size and the horsepower of your engine. So don't think we're just going to gear a bike, a 250cc, to go 400 kilometers per hour, because you know you don't have the power, and you know actually just go slower than you would have. So if you have a bike and you know you want a bit more or a bit less, but you don't really know exactly, you know you will feel it on the power. If you feel your last gear has, you know, a bit of power left, you know, you'll decide from there on your percentage change you want. On the other hand, if you have speed in mind, say we have a 450, but it's a motocross bike and it's only geared for a top speed of 100 kilometers per hour, but we know that bike is capable of a lot more. So we maybe want to achieve, let's say we want to achieve 130 kilometers per hour, which is a lot faster. So that's, you know, the calculation that we're going to use on the right side. But I went about going and I used the first method. So the new sprocket size equals, this is just the big, you know, the total, the big calculation, and we'll break it up later. So the percentage change you want, so 5% or 10% over 100, which is percentage, so 5 over 100, it's 5%, times your old sprocket size in tooth, you know, the size of that in tooth, and then plus or minus the old sprocket. So you just fill in your variables. Maybe you want 5% change, just put it over there, over 100 times your old sprocket size, no matter the front or back, and plus or minus your old sprocket. Now, how do you know if you should plus or minus? Now, if you change your back sprocket and you want to go faster, you should subtract to make it smaller. If you're changing your front sprocket, larger is faster, rear sprocket, smaller is faster. So that's all you have to know if you should add or subtract. So basically, say we want 5% change and put that over 100 times, let's say our old sprocket was a 50 tooth. Okay, this gives you an answer, so you can calculate that already and have that number ready. And then all you do with that number, let's say we're going faster and we're changing the rear sprocket, then we have to go smaller, so we subtract, what happened now, subtract from your old sprocket. So then we subtract from 50, and that'll give us our new sprocket size. Now if we use speed calculation, it's almost the same. So let's, you know, do this one. So it is your speed difference, the difference between your desired speed and your current speed difference over current speed. Okay, and then we times that by the old sprocket. Once again, you can do this calculation already and have the answer ready, and then we can continue by doing the rest of the calculations. So the difference in speed, say we want 100 to 130, so that's 30 kilometers per hour over our current speed, that is 100. So don't confuse it with this 100. This one is, you know, whatever your speed is. That could be 80, that could be 50, you know. It depends on your current speed and the speed difference you want. and then we have 3/100, so it's 3/10 actually, and then you times that by your old sprocket. Say we have 100 tooth, just making it easier now. We have 100 tooth, and then you plus or minus that. Once again, go faster, you make the rear sprocket smaller, or if you're changing the front sprocket, you go faster, make the front sprocket bigger, and times old sprocket that I said is 100, which is unrealistic, but it will make our calculations easier. So 30/100 times 100 is just 30. So plus or minus, say we're changing the front sprocket, so we have to, okay, well, 100 teeth for front sprocket is so unrealistic, but anyway, so now we have to add to make it quicker because we're changing the front sprocket. So plus 100, so our new sprocket is 130 tooth, which is, so unrealistic, but that's how you do calculate, your sprocket sizes. Now, don't make your front sprocket too big, because it might not fit in the cavity where it sits. And I wouldn't recommend you go more than 10% on a sprocket change. On a 450 for motocross that's geared very slow, yes, you can do more, but for dual sport bikes, they should be, within 5% of what you want. So don't change your sprocket and then you have to do it again because you went too far. Okay, so those are the reasons that you might want to do a sprocket change on your bike. If you want to go faster top speed and your bike has the power, if you want to go slower in first gear, or if you have massive gaps and you don't need that top speed, or you don't necessarily care that much about the first gear speed. And once again, it's not going to affect these things like that much, but I mean, you will definitely notice a difference with 10% change in ratio. So yeah, I hope you found this video helpful and informing. Yeah, I feel many people feel that sprocket change is going to do things that it's not going to do. So yeah, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.